Photography is a means of communication, a universal language and now a genuine art form, coveted by enthusiasts and collectors, displayed on billboards and in the top museums. The market pays great attention to the shades of black and white, to the authenticity of the prints, and to the signature of new and established talents.
Photography is such a democratic medium. It's a visual Esperanto. It's a language that everybody can relate to. It's part of our conditioning, part of our environment. You learn to read photographs, in a sense, in the same way that you learn to speak a language. You do it naturally, inevitably, because it's around you all the time. So I think that photography is a very approachable subject for a great many people.
In the 20s, the influence of photography became apparent in the pictorial press, which relied completely on photographs. The written word lost some of its might, and colored news magazines sprang up.
Today, we need to redefine what photography is, since it's taken a backseat to television due to the difficulties of printing and distribution. And we need to redefine the press as a necessary complement to TV. Often the text is less important now. In other words, we have more photos than text, because people don't have time to read, and it's much easier and quicker to look at a photo.
Today, photography is necessary and sometimes sufficient. Every event that gets reported is accompanied by a picture that validates the information. Since the 50s and 60s, the illustrated press has been rivaled by television. More than ever, editors choose pictures strictly in terms of quality because these photos stand the test of time compared to the transience of TV images.
News editors still think that photography is really just for illustrative purposes rather than actual journalism. Even though color photography appeared in magazines in the late 70s, there's still much headway to be made. A picture's worth 1,000 words, and that's the hardest thing, finding the photo that's worth 1,000 words.
I think that people are beginning to understand that a photographer is a real artist, just like other artists. So by distributing all these fine photos, the press plays its part in making people's work known.
Making people's work known was the reason Nicole Wisniak started Egoist in 1977, having dreamed about it ever since she was a girl. This unclassifiable magazine, which exists outside the realm of the regular press, is published when she feels like it. This periodical, which appears spasmodically, is a subjective guide to an era. It's typical of the modern age, in that its pages are dominated by photos.
The idea behind it was that I had certain desires and I was trying to find a way of letting the people I worked with express themselves and of enabling myself to do the kind of magazine I wanted to produce. But I wanted to please them. I wanted to tell them, come and work here because we won't change the frame of your photos. We won't cut 10 pages. We'll do something together, like one big family.
Even the advertising in the magazine is designed in-house.
I think it's a completely anachronistic, completely crazy project. What's comforting is to think that something that was invented, without giving a second thought to marketing or feasibility studies, should develop and be a success. It's both astonishing and very comforting, and it makes me think that maybe it wasn't such a crazy idea after all. But perhaps people could tell that it was a sincere project, and maybe that's a good marketing rule. You'll get there if there's lots of sincerity, enthusiasm, and passion in what you do.
Famous photos, revamped photos, real stars, unusual collaborations between those who write with ink and those who write with light. A zest of humor, a good dose of love and sincerity, that's the recipe for Egoist. The magazine's rarity, 13 issues in 20 years, makes it a collector's item. It invites the reader to reflect on its contents, poses the burning questions, and portrays the pleasures of the day. Egoist called on the services of Helmut Newton, then Richard Avedon, who today puts its message, fantasies, and artistry into pictures.
What I do is bring together people who I feel should work together in a kind of latter-day forum that a magazine like this provides.
Pictures are taking over our lives. Advertisements which use words to sell their products are finished. In his Confessions of an Advertising Man, David Ogilvy recommends the use of photos to sell a product because they represent reality, whereas drawings are less credible. The formula is omnipresent in advertising, which uses photography in the press as well as on billboard posters. The brand Diesel, for example, concentrated its energy on its photo campaigns, which reflect an atmosphere, a state of mind, and a certain lifestyle.
Cost to Diesel more or less $2 million a season to make it the right click and to have a perfect advertising. This is our secret, don't forget.
Let's see when you come down, I was gonna start reading them.
For Diesel, the secret of their success lies in portraying a certain idea of happiness.
It's really hard to do an advertising campaign. You must include the company's spirit, all the conditions that make it commercial, and also the angle that the company wants in the photo. It's not easy. So, for example, if you look at a Diesel photo, you can't see the photographer's name or the ad agency's name. It's the Diesel commercial.
Yep, that's it. That's so cool. Lift your chin up, don't run.
You have to juggle with various deadlines, and that's very hard, because some people think that taking a photo is up to the photographer. But there are 50, 60, or 70 people working around him before, during, and after the photo shoot. They all have to go in the same direction and have the same mentality. Diesel's commercials don't show the product. They show the lifestyle. They aim to make you think about a certain idea, a certain situation in life. You have to arrive at the shoot with clear ideas about what you want to do. During the shoot, you can change details, but after, there's almost nothing to change. And if you get it wrong, you've blown 6 months' work, and you've got the company into really big trouble.
In advertising, the trend now is to concentrate on a concept rather than the product.
Sometimes today, photographers are asked to do a cosmetics ad, or a fashion ad, or whatever, to come up with a pretty photo which will say something, but which won't necessarily show the product in detail. This phenomenon of branding is a very interesting and quite recent change, which is coming through more and more. And I think it's very interesting for the photographers too, because they no longer just have to glorify a product. They can be freer and more artistic. They can select elements which portray a certain image.
Oliviero Toscani, photographer and art director of Benetton, uses the universal themes of the day. His campaigns may be shocking. His photos are either rewarded or condemned. But one thing's for sure, scandal sells. The photographic business is progressing constantly. Professional and amateur photo labs just keep on developing. Today, the success of the new media is attracting new investors.
Photography is very important. The person who first understood just how important it is the world's richest man, Bill Gates. In 1989, he set up a photo agency that not many people know about these days, called Corbis. He's already spent $1 billion buying lots of collections because he feels that photography and history go hand in hand. In 50 or 100 years' time, you'll be able to make history with photography. They think that the televisions in people's homes will become computers. And with your TV, you'll be able to print magazines and newspapers whenever you want, with or without photos.
The technology, which will become a part of everyday life, will create new needs for images. Getty Images owns millions of documents in black and white and color, which are accessible to clients via the internet.
Getty Images was only born 3 years ago, and we began by looking at the photographic industry, looking at the archive and library industry, and studying it very carefully and looking at which areas of the industry would act as the best possible platform for growth. And we came to a conclusion that stock photography would be the best platform for growth within the industry. And therefore we acquired Tony Stone shortly thereafter, based here in London, a worldwide stock photography agency. And following that, made several other acquisitions, including, of course, the Hulton Archive. But the history is short but extremely active.
In order to supply all these new media with pictures, the photos are scanned and digitally stored.
The market for photography is going to grow, it's going to continue to grow. And the reason for that is that there are more and more vehicles, whether you look at magazines as an example, or television as another example, which need to communicate messages with imagery. And we are seeing an explosion in the demand for visual content, which is how we describe the industry, across all of our customer segments. And we don't see that changing. We see that accelerating. You only have to look at new phenomena like the internet. Web designers are growing in their appetite for imagery, whereas only 4 or 5 years ago, no one knew what a web designer was. And what they needed in terms of design for a web page was usually text. Now, of course, they're putting a lot of imagery on those web pages, and that is increasing demand for our basic products.
The profession is changing, but at the same time, the need for pictures is greater and greater. Whether it's still or moving images, I think the needs are going to be considerable. But there's a big change in customer trends, in both the needs of the professional and the consumer markets.
Photographs have become decorative objects, not just simple souvenirs. That's how Keystone came about. With a fine quality print and a good frame, photographs are ready to enter people's homes.
It's a genuine print, not a poster. It's a real photo from a laboratory with the dimensions and presentation of one's choice. I think that's a good way of perpetuating archives like ours, which contain millions of documents. I think it's a good thing to use new technologies, but I also think it's necessary to keep contact with a physical object through archives like ours.
In New York, a new phenomenon emerged in the 70s. Photographs became collectible items. Photographic galleries began to open all over the world. Harry Lunn, one of the first collectors and a great expert in this field, became a dealer and opened a gallery.
The modern tradition of collecting contemporary photographs began around 1970 with Witkin in New York, and then me in Washington, who both opened galleries. In the 50s, you had Helen Guy with Limelight in New York, which showed a lot of photographs at very, very low prices. A photograph at that time by Edward Weston, which was worth $25 then, is worth as much as $70,000 now. Expansion in this collecting tradition began in around 1970.
In every major capital, there are auctions. Photographs, be they daguerreotypes, albums, or vintage pictures, reach record prices, proving that the photographic market is in the midst of a sensational growth.
1800, 50 000, 52 000, 55 000, 58 000, 60 000.
Images are precious and fragile. This album by Gustave Legray went for over 700,000 francs. That's almost $120,000. This market is maintained by a few big collectors, American foundations, and museums from all over the world.
Photographers whose work strikes parallels with certain major art movements, be it surrealism, other aspects of the avant-garde of the 20s, seem able to command higher prices, undoubtedly because there is a crossover of buying. Collectors of great 20th century art have, particularly in recent years, looked to photography as a key medium for the expression of avant-garde ideas in this century. One sees similarly at the more contemporary end of the market that there is a certain premium being paid for work by photographers who have achieved recognition within the contemporary art scene, who may call themselves artists whose medium is photography rather than calling themselves photographers, though I'm not quite sure that it's that easy to draw a dividing line between, unless it's a dividing line based on simply on the marketplace and which galleries sell which photographers. If a gallery traditionally associated with selling art takes up a young photographer and promotes him or her, it is easier perhaps for that gallery to pitch the prices at a level which, at a relatively high level, but which do not seem so expensive to art collectors, whereas a younger commercial photographer, let's say, working in fashion or advertising or whatever it may be, would find it harder to pitch into the market at that kind of level.
Today, the galleries are becoming more specialized. They enable the collectors to find the pictures they're looking for and the general public to learn more about photography. Everyone is hoping to find the hidden gem in there somewhere.
Everyone has always, in the field, waited for $1 million photograph and predicted a parody with painting. I don't think it will happen because of different quirks of the two mediums. But I think the prices of photographs for masterpieces will continue to go up in a comparable percentage with the rest of the art world. The market for the field of photography, I think, is particularly active right now within the art world and undergoing a lot of changes. The field has been waiting to be discovered for a couple decades now. And if it's ever been possible to say it's really been discovered and is pretty fully integrated into the art world, I think it's fair to say it's happening now. There's the market for vintage photography, which we've always specialized in. But in the last few years, maybe the last 4 or 5, there's really developed a very strong market for contemporary photography, and one that's distinct without much crossover to the earlier period.
With photography, we're talking, but with the exception of daguerreotypes, of course, and 1 or 2 other processes, Polaroids, we're talking about images made from a negative, whereas there is the possibility of printing, in theory, any number of copies. This is a problem for newcomers to the field. I've had on countless occasions conversations with people who are looking at the subject of photography, thinking of collecting it, but are very discouraged because of their anxiety about this question, how many prints might exist? There's no easy answer to that, because yes, in theory, there is the possibility of a quite significant open edition for any image. The reality of the history of photography is, however, that all too often very, very few prints were ever made from a given negative. That great prints from so many great negatives are incredibly rare things. Today, many photographers and many dealers who are selling photography encourage the idea of numbering editions. A photographer might, for example, create an edition of 50. Even there, that doesn't necessarily mean there will be 50 printed, because he may only print and sell 10 or a dozen. But it would be a mistake to think that that is a truly limited edition, whereas prints which were not numbered from early periods may exist in profusion.
There's a great deal of photography has a big role in our modern society, you know, even though most of it is television, communication, and film. But photography, in a way, it freezes, it blocks, it becomes an object. Television is over in 1 second. It's a different thing. It's electric in a way. Film is a thing, something that you have to watch only in the dark. A photograph you put on a wall and look at like a painting. Besides a magazine, you know, you also hang it in a museum, you hang it in a house. So it has an object quality. As a result, I think it has an independent life.
Museums everywhere are opening up to photography. The sumptuous Maison Européenne de la Photographie in Paris is, as its name suggests, devoted to photography.
I think it's a fine place. It's what the Picasso Museum is to painting. In other words, it's both an intimate and very noble place. At last, photography isn't treated like a poor relation stuck away in the basement somewhere.
The fact that there is so much interest, so much passionate interest in photography today is not surprising at all to me. I think that photography is really the only truly modern medium aside from film, and that if you're alive to what's going on in the world today, if the experience of the moment is fresh and to you, then so is photography. And even though some of the pictures that you might be seeing, for example, in this gallery, are 150 years old, they were fresh to those people who made them and saw them 150 years ago, and they still carry that in their lineaments. There's a kind of immediacy and excitement about seeing the world photographically that is not present in many of the other media.
Money, money, money. Does it corrupt you? Is it the devil? It's true that it gets everywhere, and it has just discovered photography. The market judges, decides, creates glory and defeat, makes prices go up and down. Although one may regret the rise of this empire, nothing can replace it. And since we've just seen that there are such things as fakes in photography, it proves that it's now a part of the art market.